The colossal shape rising from the depths was beyond anything they had ever imagined. It was not flesh, not rock, but something in between. A massive organic mass that shimmered with sickly green and red light, covered in layers of glowing algae and strange root-like growths. It dwarfed the airboat, its immense form slowly unfurling in the dense darkness, revealing more and more glowing, unblinking red eyes embedded within its surface. From its deepest part, the guttural gurgle reverberated, a sound of immense, ancient hunger. The tentacles already holding the airboat tightened, dragging them relentlessly towards the rising horror. The sweet floral scent was now cloying, suffocating, making their heads spin. The humming and whispers intensified, no longer a song, but a dizzying cacophony of desperate voices, overlaid with the constant splash of unseen currents. "Jump!" Ben screamed, his voice strained with terror. He grabbed Maya, trying to pull her towards the edge of the boat. "Where?" Jake yelled, his eyes darting frantically. The water around them boiled with activity, glowing tentacles and pale waving. Hands rising and sinking, beckoning. Escape seemed impossible. As Ben struggled to pry Maya's fingers from the boat's rail, a thick, slimy tendril burst from the water next to him, wrapping around his leg with impossible speed. It pulled him down, hard. He gasped, choking on the sickly sweet air, his head disappearing beneath the murky surface with a desperate splash. "Ben!" Maya shrieked, reaching for him, but he was gone. Only the churning water and a few rising bubbles remained. The mournful song from the colossal entity swelled in triumph. The remaining tentacles on the boat pulled harder, drawing Jake and Maya closer to the rising mass. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. It wasn't a creature that lived in the Everglades. It was as if the Everglades itself was a living creature, and they were being drawn into its monstrous heart. As their boat scraped against the slimy, undulating surface of the entity, the smell of decaying flowers and metallic blood was so intense it was dizzying. Jake felt a strange, tingling sensation on his arm and looked down. Where the water had splashed onto his skin, a faint, almost invisible reddish filament seemed to be extending from his forearm, seeking connection, pulsing with a dim, internal light, identical to those in the entity's glowing eyes. The whispers changed again. They were no longer mournful, but insidious, comforting, and oddly familiar. They spoke directly to Jake's mind, 1,000 voices blending into one harmonious thought. "Do not fear. You are home. We are all here. Rest, finally. Rest." Maya, strangely, seemed to be growing calmer. Her frantic struggles lessened. Her eyes, still wide with fear, began to take on a faraway, dreamlike quality. She turned to Jake, a serene, almost blissful smile spreading across her face. "It's beautiful, Jake," she whispered, her voice soft, devoid of terror. "Don't you hear them? All the stories, all the lives. It's peaceful." She reached out a pale hand, not to grab him, but to touch the shimmering, algae-covered surface of the monstrous entity. As her fingers made contact, her skin seemed to glow faintly with the same green and red light, and a network of tiny, glowing filaments spread rapidly from her fingertips, disappearing into the pulsating mass. Her body went limp, a faint sigh escaping her lips, and she slid silently into the water, dissolving into the glowing depths, becoming part of the vast organic horror. Jake screamed, a raw animal sound of pure despair. He was alone, trapped. The airboat was dissolving around him, slowly being absorbed by the entity's surface. The filaments on his arm twitched, pulling at his skin, and the comforting whispers in his mind grew louder, promising endless rest. He was next. Jake's screams died in his throat as the filaments on his arm pulsed fiercely. The comforting whispers in his mind, now a deafening roar of welcome. The monstrous organic mass of the Everglades entity loomed over him, its glowing eyes fixed on his trembling form. The airboat had almost completely melted into its slimy surface, leaving him clinging to a final dissolving piece of metal. He was losing the fight. His strength, his will drained away, replaced by the same serene calmness that had overtaken Maya. He felt a strange pull, a profound weariness, an undeniable urge to simply let go, to sink into the beautiful, sad song and join the countless others. But then a flicker, a tiny, almost painful flash of defiance. It wasn't his own. It was a faint, fragmented image from the stream of memories flowing into him, a desperate struggle, a final guttural shout against the current. It was Silas. Silas, the grizzled old guide who had seemed to disappear without a trace. Jake saw him deep within the entity's swirling, luminous depths, not fully absorbed, but tethered, his old eyes wide with a desperate warning. He wasn't welcoming them. He was fighting. He was trying to break through. The sweet, floral scent suddenly became a choking stench of rot. The metallic tang intensified to that of fresh, cold blood. The soothing whispers in Jake's mind cracked, revealing raw screams of agony beneath them. The beautiful song was a facade. This was not peace. This was consumption. With a final desperate surge of his own vanishing will, fueled by Silas's silent warning, Jake plunged his hand into the dissolving surface of the entity, not to surrender, but to fight. He grabbed onto one of the glowing tentacles, the one nearest him, pulling with all the strength he had left. It was slimy, surprisingly warm, and felt like dense, living rope. As he pulled, a section of the entity's surface, where his hand was, began to recede, not dissolve, but retract, as if he had hit a pressure point, a nerve. The glowing red eyes on the monstrous mass flickered wildly, and the serene song broke into a cacophony of enraged, guttural gurgles. A sudden, powerful current surged through. The water, pulling Jake and the remnants of the dissolving airboat away from the main mass, towards a narrow, dark channel that opened into the dense cypress swamp. The entity thrashed, its vast form creating immense waves that slammed against the trees, but it could not follow. It was too large for the narrow passage. Jake felt himself being carried by the current through the winding, familiar channels. The sweet, cloying smell lessened, replaced by the fresher air of the swamp. The glowing filaments on his arm retreated, shrinking back into his skin, leaving only a faint, pulsing warmth. He was eventually washed ashore, half drowned and barely conscious, near a small abandoned fishing shack miles from where they had started. He was found by a passing hunter the next morning, delirious, muttering about glowing eyes and a singing swamp. Years later, Jake was a different man. He avoided boats, large bodies of water, and especially the Everglades. He never spoke of Ben or Maya or the horrors he had witnessed. He tried to forget, but sometimes on humid Florida nights, when the air hung heavy and still, he would feel a familiar, subtle, pulsing warmth in his left forearm. He would look down, and though there was no visible mark, he knew it was there. The lingering trace of the filaments that had connected him to the Everglades entity. And as he'd watch the news, see reports of new, sudden disappearances in remote areas of the glades, or strange, unexplainable sightings of shimmering lights in the depths, a chilling realization would dawn on him. Silas hadn't disappeared. He was still in there, a reluctant, trapped guardian trying to warn others through the entity's own insidious network. And Jake, he hadn't truly escaped. The entity hadn't simply let him go. The reddish filaments and the pulsing warmth on his arm weren't just remnants of contact. They were a deeper connection, a part of the Everglades consciousness that had decided not to consume him, but to repurpose him. He was not a victim who got away. He was a conduit, an unwitting seed bearer. The ancient amphibious entity of the Everglades didn't just lure people into its depths. It also found ways to extend its reach beyond its watery prison. Jake was the new link, carrying a part of its essence, a silent, dormant fragment of its monstrous being, unknowingly spreading its influence, its whispers, its terrible song to new, unsuspecting places, ensuring that the glades could one day truly embrace the entire world. The siren's song had been a lure, but his survival was the ultimate insidious victory for the ancient swamp. Leo crumpled to the ground, his body shaking, trapped in the mind's shared nightmare. Sarah, though reeling from the psychic assault, knew they had to move. Mark, however, remained rooted, his gaze distant, his body twitching as if experiencing the phantom pain of collapse. The reddish glow under his skin pulsed with alarming speed. "Mark, snap out of it!" Sarah yelled, slapping his face. He blinked, a flicker of awareness returning to his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a profound, vacant terror. The spectral miners in the cavern seemed to draw closer, their moans now taking on a new, more insistent quality, a low, continuous, draining sound, like air being slowly sucked from a sealed chamber. The glowing reddish dust in the air intensified, swirling around them, coating their faces. Sarah felt a strange dryness in her throat, a burning in her lungs, as if the air was thinning, growing stale. "The gas!" Sarah choked out, her voice raspy. "It's not just memories, it's taking our oxygen." They scrambled back, trying to escape the encroaching dust and the terrifying visions. The rhythmic thump-thump of the mind's heartbeat grew louder, faster, now accompanied by a faint, wet, sloshing sound from deeper in the cavern. As they retreated, Mark suddenly stumbled. A thick, dark, almost rubbery tendril, glistening with moisture, had emerged from a crack in the rock wall. It wrapped around his ankle, pulling him down with surprising force. It bristled with tiny, needle-like protrusions that seemed to dig into his skin, radiating that familiar reddish glow. "Help!" Mark cried, his voice weak, as the tendril began to pull him towards a widening fissure in the cavern floor, a black, inky abyss from which the sloshing sound emanated. Leo, despite his fear, crawled forward, fumbling for his emergency multi-tool. He found a small, sharp blade and began hacking at the tendril wrapped around Mark's leg. The tendril was incredibly tough, like old leather, but with a horrifying, fleshy give. As he cut, a thin, reddish-black fluid oozed from the wound, smelling strongly of sulfur and iron. The spectral miners shrieked, their moans turning to enraged wails. The glowing dust swirled violently, creating miniature tornadoes of suffering. The claustrophobic pressure intensified, as if the very rock was trying to crush them. Sarah, meanwhile, noticed a change in the floor beneath them. The rock, usually solid, now seemed to undulate, to subtly pulsate with the mind's heartbeat. And from minute cracks in the floor, thin, hair-like filaments, glowing faintly red, began to emerge, spreading like a subterranean network, seeking new connections. "It's everywhere. Sarah screamed, pointing at the floor, then at the tendril that had seized Mark. The mine isn't breathing gas, it's breathing life. With a final desperate slash, Leo severed the tendril. Mark collapsed, gasping for breath, the reddish glow on his skin fading, leaving behind faint, needle-like marks. But the moment the tendril was cut, a new sound filled the cavern, a low, resonant groan from the depths, a sound of immense pain and ancient anger. The severed tendril on the floor twitched, then dissolved into a pile of reddish dust which quickly swirled away, vanishing into the glowing mist. But from the fissure in the floor, where Mark had almost been dragged, a dark, viscous liquid began to well up, bubbling slowly, its surface shimmering with an internal, sickly red light. It pulsed with the mine's heartbeat. And from that liquid, a chorus of deep guttural whispers rose, coalescing into a single ancient voice that filled their minds, a voice made of rock and despair. You wound us, but we are infinite. The breath is ours. The darkness awaits. The dark, viscous liquid bubbling from the fissure pulsed with the mine's heartbeat, and the ancient voice echoed in their minds. Sarah, Leo, and Mark, weakened and terrified, stumbled back towards the mine's entrance, their only escape. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the mine's pulse filled the air, now accompanied by a new, horrifying sound. A low, continuous grinding and scraping, as if immense subterranean teeth were slowly, inexorably gnawing through the earth. The ground beneath them seemed to shift and tremble with each beat of the mine's monstrous heart. As they stumbled back through the narrow passages, they noticed the timber supports were splintering faster, the cracks in the walls growing wider, oozing that reddish liquid. The mine was no longer passively absorbing. It was actively collapsing, itself trying to seal them within its vast living maw. It's trying to bury us, Leo gasped, pushing Mark ahead. They clawed their way up the steep ascent, the air growing thinner, more suffocating with every labored breath. The sweet, metallic smell of the mine's breath, now laced with the acrid scent of ozone and burning rock, clung to them. From behind, the screams of the spectral miners intensified, transforming from anguish to a desperate, possessive fury. Don't leave us. You belong. You are the breath. Just as they reached the entrance, the rusty metal frame groaning under. The immense pressure, the ground beneath them gave a final, violent lurch. The entire passage behind them collapsed with a deafening roar, showering them with dust and debris. The mine's internal heartbeat roared in triumph, then slowly faded, replaced by an eerie, muffled silence. They were out. They stumbled into the cool night air, gasping for oxygen, looking back at the now sealed-off entrance. Only a pile of rubble and twisted metal remained, as if the mine had never been there at all. the old town of Blackwood lay silent under the stars. They had survived. Weeks turned into months. The physical wounds healed, but the mental scars remained. They never posted the footage from mine number 7. The memory of the breathing rock, the spectral miners, and the gas that stole breath and forced memories was too raw, too impossible to explain. They sold their equipment, gave up urban exploration, and tried to return to normal lives. But normal never truly returned. Mark began to suffer from extreme claustrophobia, unable to enter small spaces. He also found himself prone to strange, vivid dreams of collapsing tunnels and choking dust. But the most unsettling thing was the faint, reddish filament that sometimes pulsed subtly under the skin of his forearm, right where the handprint had been. He'd dismiss it as a phantom limb, a psychological after effect. Sarah, too, felt changes. She often experienced a deep, aching weariness, as if her very essence was being slowly drained. She also found herself strangely drawn to deep, dark places, to caves and forgotten basements, feeling a morbid curiosity she couldn't explain. And in moments of silence, she swore she could hear faint, mournful whispers just beyond her hearing, a chorus of distant suffering. Leo, more subtly, became obsessed with geology, with rock formations, with the unseen forces of the earth. He spent hours researching abandoned mines, their structures, their collapses. He felt a strange, inexplicable connection to the very ground beneath his feet. And sometimes, when he was alone, he would feel a faint, rhythmic thump-thump vibrate. Through the floor, a phantom pulse. One day, Mark was at home watching the news. A report came on about a new, unprecedented geological phenomenon in rural Pennsylvania. Deep beneath the surface, seismic activity was increasing in an area previously thought stable. Scientists were baffled by the sheer scale of the subterranean movement, theorizing about unknown fault lines. But then, the newscaster showed a satellite image. A vast, intricate network of faint reddish lines, almost like glowing veins, was slowly spreading beneath the Pennsylvania landscape, originating from the general area of the old Blackwood mine. It was deep, unseen by the naked eye, but clearly visible to the satellite's advanced sensors. Mark's blood ran cold. The image on the screen looked exactly like the glowing filaments he'd seen in the mine, like the one pulsing beneath his own skin, and the grinding and scraping he'd heard during their escape. It wasn't just the mine collapsing. It was burrowing, expanding. The breathing mine wasn't a cursed place. It was a single vast subterranean organism, an ancient sentient fungal network that had adapted to the deep earth. The coal, the rock, the water, these were merely its sustenance. And the miners, they hadn't been its victims in the traditional sense. They were its food, their lives and memories absorbed and integrated into its collective consciousness, fueling its growth. The mind-altering gas was its method of assimilation, breaking down mental barriers to allow absorption. And the curse, the haunting, it was a natural biological process of an entity that viewed humanity not as prey, but as a rich source of nutrients and consciousness. The mine hadn't been sealed off. It had simply closed its temporary maw, leaving behind its spores, its connections, its living fragments. Mark, Sarah, and Leo weren't lucky survivors. They were the carriers, the reddish filaments, the unseen hums, the lingering feelings. These weren't trauma. They were the dormant mycelia, slowly spreading within them, ready to sprout new connections wherever they went, to new patches of fertile earth, new unsuspecting towns. The breathing mine hadn't been contained. It had merely found its new hosts, and through them it would continue its slow, inexorable spread across the country, one human connection at a time, until the very land beneath their feet, finally, became one vast, living, sentient horror. The story of Blackwood Mine number 7 was just the beginning of the Earth's awakening.